My husband's mistress sat in the conference room, confidently discussing her plans for renovating the mansion she expected to inherit. 20 minutes later, she discovered that the woman reading the will was not only the estate attorney, but also the wife she had been betraying for 8 months. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hayes, Mitchell and Associates, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany conference table. As senior partner and lead estate attorney, I had overseen countless will readings in this very room, but none had carried the personal weight of today's proceedings. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and barely concealed tension as family members filed in, each carrying their own expectations and hidden agendas. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood at the head of the conference table, adjusting my navy blue blazer and reviewing the documents one final time. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. For the past 3 months, since Eleanor Mitchell's passing, I had been meticulously preparing for this moment, not just as a professional obligation, but as the culmination of a carefully orchestrated plan that had been months in the making. The conference room itself reflected the prestige of our firm. Rich mahogany panels lined the walls, interspersed with leather-bound legal volumes that had witnessed decades of family disputes, corporate mergers, and inheritance battles. The massive table could seat 12 comfortably, and today, every chair would be occupied. The morning light filtering through the windows illuminated the downtown Riverside skyline, a view that had always reminded me of the heights one could reach through determination and strategic thinking. Eleanor Mitchell had been more than just a client to me. She had been David's aunt, yes, but more importantly, she had become a mentor and friend over the years. A shrewd businesswoman who had built her boutique hotel empire from nothing, Eleanor possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that cut through pretense and saw people for who they truly were. Her estate, valued at over $50 million, included not just the hotel chain but also prime real estate, a substantial investment portfolio, and a collection of modern art that would make any museum envious. What made this particular will reading extraordinary was not the size of the estate, but the intimate knowledge Eleanor had possessed about her family's personal affairs. Unbeknownst to most, Eleanor had been fully aware of the fractures in her nephew's marriage, the deceptions that had been carefully concealed, and the woman who had been led to believe she would play a significant role in the family's future. I had discovered David's affair 2 months ago, not through dramatic confrontation or suspicious behavior, but through the mundane reality of joint credit card statements and unexplained expenditures. The charges told a story of expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and jewelry purchases that had never found their way to me. Jessica Parker, interior designer, 32 years old, and apparently someone who had developed very specific ideas about her future financial security. The morning had started early for me. I had arrived at the office before dawn, reviewing every clause of Eleanor's will, every codicil, every carefully worded provision that would soon reshape the lives of everyone gathered in this room. The document represented more than just legal language. It was Eleanor's final statement about family loyalty, personal integrity, and the consequences of betrayal. As I stood there, I reflected on the conversation I had shared with Eleanor just weeks before her passing. She had called me into her hospital room, her voice weak but her mind sharp as ever. "Sarah, dear," she had said, her eyes holding mine with intensity, "I know things have been difficult in your marriage. I know about David's choices, and I want you to know that they don't reflect on you or your worth." The revelation that Eleanor had known about the affair had stunned me. She had continued, her voice growing stronger. "I've made provisions in my will that I believe will set things right. Trust me when I say that justice will be served, and those who have shown true loyalty will be rewarded accordingly." Now, 3 months later, I stood ready to execute Eleanor's final wishes. The will I held in my hands contained surprises that would shock everyone present, revelations that would expose deceptions, and consequences that would forever alter the family dynamic. The first to arrive was Margaret Mitchell, David's mother, a woman of 73 who carried herself with the dignity of someone who had weathered many family storms. She entered the conference room with measured steps, her silver hair perfectly styled, her black dress appropriate for the solemn occasion. Margaret had always been kind to me, even during the more difficult periods of my marriage, and I genuinely hoped that today's revelations would not cause her additional pain. Sarah, dear, Margaret said, approaching me with the warmth that had always characterized our relationship. Thank you for handling Eleanor's affairs with such care. I know this hasn't been easy for you, managing both the legal aspects and the family dynamics. I embraced her gently, feeling the weight of what was to come. Eleanor was very specific about her wishes, Margaret. I think you'll find that she put considerable thought into every decision. Margaret nodded, taking her seat at the table. She was always thoughtful, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I suppose that's how she built such a successful business empire. Tom Mitchell arrived next with his wife Lisa, both of them carrying the subdued demeanor appropriate for a will reading. Tom had always been the more straightforward of the 2 Mitchell brothers, a man who valued honesty and hard work over charm and manipulation. At 40, he had built a respectable career in engineering, living modestly but comfortably, never expecting or demanding more than what he had earned. "Morning, Sarah," Tom said, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "I hope you're holding up okay through all of this." Lisa, ever perceptive, studied my face with the kind of careful attention that suggested she sensed undercurrents in the family dynamic. "This must be especially difficult for you, handling Eleanor's estate while dealing with everything else." The comment was cryptic enough to be polite, but specific enough to suggest that she was aware of tensions in my marriage. I appreciated her sensitivity and her loyalty to me over the years. "Thank you both," I replied. Eleanor made my job quite clear. She was very specific about her intentions. As the morning progressed, other family members and close friends began to arrive. Eleanor's longtime housekeeper, Maria Santos, who had served the family for over 20 years. Dr. James Crawford, Eleanor's physician and close friend. Patricia Williams, Eleanor's neighbor and bridge partner. Each person who entered the room carried their own relationship with Eleanor, their own memories, and their own expectations about how her estate might be distributed. The atmosphere grew increasingly charged as the appointed time approached. I could feel the weight of anticipation in the room, the carefully controlled excitement of people who were about to learn their financial fate. Some faces showed appropriate solemnity for the occasion, while others betrayed barely concealed eagerness. At precisely 10 o'clock, I heard voices in the hallway outside the conference room. David's familiar laugh echoed through the corridor, that easy, confident sound that had once made my heart skip but now felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. He was speaking to someone, his voice carrying the casual authority that had always characterized his interactions with people he considered beneath his social status. "I'm telling you, Jess, this is going to change everything for us," I heard him say as their footsteps approached. "Aunt Eleanor always had a soft spot for family, and she absolutely loved you. You made such an impression on her during those visits." The response came in a voice I recognized from surveillance and private investigation reports, but had never heard in person. Jessica Parker's tone was bright with excitement and anticipation. "I still can't believe how quickly she took to me. When she said she wanted to make sure I was taken care of, I knew she meant it. Your aunt was such a special woman. She saw something in you that she respected," David continued, his voice growing closer. "The way you talked about your design plans, your vision for updating some of her properties. She was impressed by your ambition and your taste." I felt my jaw tighten at the casual lies David was weaving. Eleanor had met Jessica exactly once, during a family gathering 6 months ago, and the encounter had been brief and polite at best. Eleanor had later confided to me that she found Jessica presumptuous and calculating, someone who was clearly more interested in David's family connections than in David himself. "I've been thinking about the renovations for the main house," Jessica was saying as they reached the conference room door. "The Victorian mansion has such incredible bones, but it needs updating. I'm thinking of opening up the floor plan, adding some modern touches while preserving the historical character." The casual way she discussed renovating Eleanor's beloved family home, as if it were already hers, revealed the depth of her presumption. She had not only been led to believe she would inherit property, but she had been making detailed plans for how to modify it according to her own tastes. And the hotel properties, Jessica continued, her voice growing more animated. I've already started sketching ideas for updating the interiors. Modern luxury meets classic elegance. I think Eleanor would have loved to see her properties elevated to the next level. The door opened, and David entered first, his tall frame filling the doorway with the kind of confident presence that had always commanded attention. At 47, he remained handsome in a conventional way, his dark hair showing just enough gray to suggest maturity and success. He wore his charcoal suit with the ease of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. But it was Jessica who immediately captured everyone's attention. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who believed herself to be stepping into a new chapter of wealth and influence. Her auburn hair cascaded over her shoulders in carefully styled waves, and her black dress was both appropriate for the occasion and expensive enough to suggest someone who had already begun living beyond her current means. Good morning, everyone, David said, his voice carrying its usual warm authority. I apologize if we're running a few minutes behind schedule. Jessica and I were discussing some of the practical aspects of Eleanor's estate. The presumption in his words was staggering. He was speaking as if Jessica had already been confirmed as a beneficiary, as if her role in the family's financial future was a settled matter. He guided her to 2 chairs near the middle of the table, positioning themselves where they could see and be seen by everyone present. Jessica's smile was radiant as she settled into her chair, her posture reflecting confidence and anticipation. I want to thank you all for welcoming me into this family gathering, she said, her voice carrying the kind of practiced warmth that suggested she had rehearsed this moment. Eleanor meant so much to all of us, and I know she would want us to honor her memory by moving forward with her wishes. The irony of her words was almost overwhelming. Here was a woman who had met Eleanor once, speaking about honoring her memory, while having spent months in an affair with Eleanor's nephew. She was positioning herself as a legitimate member of the family, someone whose presence at this intimate gathering was natural and expected. Eleanor always spoke so highly of you, Jessica, Margaret said politely, though I caught the slight uncertainty in her voice. Margaret was too well-mannered to question Jessica's presence directly, but her tone suggested she was still processing the situation. She was such an inspiration to me, Jessica replied, her eyes bright with what appeared to be genuine emotion. The way she built her business empire, the way she maintained her independence while still caring for her family. She showed me what was possible for a woman with vision and determination. I watched this performance with fascination and growing anger. Jessica was not just expecting to inherit Eleanor's wealth. She was already inhabiting the role of Eleanor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor's protege and successor. She had constructed an entire narrative about her relationship with Eleanor, complete with deep conversations about business philosophy and women's empowerment. Eleanor did have strong opinions about women in business, Tom observed, his tone carefully neutral. She believed in earning your success through hard work and integrity. Exactly, Jessica said, missing the subtle emphasis Tom had placed on the word quote, earning. She told me that she saw something of herself in me, that entrepreneurial spirit. When she talked about making sure I was taken care of, I knew she meant it in the context of helping me build something meaningful. The depth of her delusion was breathtaking. Not only had Eleanor never had such conversations with Jessica, but Eleanor had specifically mentioned to me that she found Jessica's presumptuous attitude troubling. Eleanor had built her empire through decades of sacrifice, risk-taking, and strategic thinking. The idea that she would view someone primarily known for spending other people's money as a kindred spirit was absurd. Well, I said, finally speaking directly to Jessica for the first time. Eleanor was certainly very specific about her wishes. She put considerable thought into every aspect of her estate planning. Jessica turned to me with a smile that was both grateful and slightly condescending. You must be Sarah, David's wife. I've heard so much about you. Thank you for handling all the legal aspects of this. I know it must be complicated, managing such a large estate. The casual way she acknowledged my role as David's wife, as if it were a minor detail in a much larger story, was telling. She had clearly been coached to view me as an obstacle to be managed, rather than a person deserving of respect. Her tone suggested she saw me as a functionary, someone whose job was to facilitate the transfer of wealth to more deserving recipients. "I am indeed, Sarah," I replied, my tone professional but carrying an undertone that made David shift uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm also the senior partner at this firm and the attorney who worked closely with Eleanor to ensure her wishes were properly documented." For just a moment, I saw something flicker across Jessica's face. A brief pause, as if she were processing information that didn't quite fit with her preconceived notions. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by that same bright confidence. "How wonderful that you were able to work so closely with Eleanor," Jessica said. "I'm sure she appreciated having someone so thorough handling her affairs." The word affairs hung in the air with unintentional irony, and I saw David's face tighten almost imperceptibly. He was beginning to sense that the morning might not unfold exactly as he had planned. As I prepared to begin the formal reading of Eleanor's will, I reflected on the careful choreography that had brought us all to this moment. Every person in this room had been shaped by their relationship with Eleanor, their expectations about her estate, and their assumptions about family loyalty and personal integrity. In the next hour, all of those assumptions would be tested, and the true nature of Eleanor's character would be revealed through the legal document I held in my hands. The stage was set for what would become one of the most devastating and satisfying moments of my professional career. Eleanor had entrusted me not just with executing her will, but with delivering justice in the most public and humiliating way possible. As I looked around the room at the faces of people who had no idea what was coming, I felt a profound sense of anticipation mixed with the solemn responsibility of carrying out a dear friend's final wishes. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the conference room where Eleanor's carefully planned reckoning was about to unfold. Justice, as it turned out, was indeed a dish best served cold, and Eleanor had spent her final months ensuring that it would be prepared to perfection. The formal proceedings began with the weight of legal tradition and family expectation. I cleared my throat and addressed the assembled group with the professional demeanor that had served me well throughout my career. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted from casual conversation to solemn attention, as everyone recognized that the moment they had been waiting for had finally arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Eleanor Catherine Mitchell, who passed away on March 15th of this year. As her chosen executor and estate attorney, I will be presenting her final wishes as they were recorded and witnessed according to California state law." The formal language created an immediate sense of gravity, and I watched as postures straightened and conversations ceased. Even Jessica, who had been whispering excitedly to David moments before, turned her full attention to me with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she was preparing to hear life-changing news. "Before we begin with the specific bequests," I continued, "I want to share some context that Eleanor specifically requested be included. She wanted everyone to understand the reasoning behind her decisions and the values that guided her choices." I opened the leather portfolio containing Eleanor's will and the accompanying letter she had written to be read aloud at this gathering. Her handwriting, even in her final weeks, had remained strong and decisive, reflecting the character that had built an empire from nothing. Eleanor wrote these words herself, and she insisted they be shared with all of you today. She said, "I have spent my life building something meaningful, not just for myself, but for future generations who understand the value of hard work, integrity, and genuine family loyalty. My estate represents more than money and property. It represents the culmination of decades of sacrifice, risk-taking, and strategic thinking. I want my legacy to benefit those who have demonstrated these same values in their own lives." The words carried Eleanor's voice so clearly that I could almost hear her speaking them. She had been passionate about ensuring that her wealth would not corrupt or spoil those who received it, but would instead reward character and strengthen family bonds built on authentic foundations. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her expression reflecting deep concentration as she absorbed every word. I could see her mentally cataloging the phrases about hard work and integrity, likely interpreting them as confirmation of Eleanor's appreciation for her own supposed qualities. The irony was staggering, watching someone who had spent months in deception nodding along with words about family loyalty and genuine character. "Eleanor also wanted me to emphasize," I continued, that she had considerable knowledge about the personal lives and choices of her family members. She believed that true character revealed itself not in public moments, but in private decisions and how people treated those who trusted them most. David's face had begun to show the first signs of discomfort. The reference to private decisions and trust was uncomfortably specific, and I could see him beginning to wonder if Eleanor had known more about his personal affairs than he had realized. His fingers drummed silently against the mahogany table, a nervous habit I had observed during our worst arguments. "Now," I said, setting Eleanor's letter aside and lifting the formal will document, "we will proceed with the specific bequests as Eleanor outlined them." The tension in the room was palpable, as everyone prepared to learn their fate. I had overseen many will readings throughout my career, but none had carried the personal significance of this moment. Eleanor had entrusted me not just with legal execution, but with delivering a carefully orchestrated message about consequences and justice. To my longtime housekeeper, Maria Santos, who has served my family with dedication and discretion for over 20 years, I leave the sum of $200,000 in ownership of the cottage on my estate grounds, with the understanding that she has earned both through her loyalty and exemplary service. Maria gasped audibly, her hands flying to cover her mouth as tears began to flow. The bequest was generous beyond her wildest expectations, and the emotional response was genuine and heartfelt. Eleanor had always valued Maria's quiet competence and unwavering discretion, qualities that had made her more than an employee but a trusted member of the household. "Eleanor also included a personal note for you, Maria," I added, retrieving a sealed envelope from the portfolio. "She wanted you to know that your kindness and integrity made her final years more comfortable and joyful." The genuine emotion in the room provided a stark contrast to the calculated expectations that some others were harboring. Maria's bequest set a tone of Eleanor's appreciation for authentic service and character, qualities that would become increasingly important as the reading continued. To Dr. James Crawford, my physician and friend, who provided not only medical care but companionship and wisdom during my illness, I leave my collection of first-edition medical texts and the sum of $100,000 for his continued research into treatments for the conditions that ultimately claimed my life. Dr. Crawford accepted the bequest with the quiet dignity that had characterized his care for Eleanor. He had been more than a physician to her, serving as a confidant and advisor during her final months. The gift acknowledged not just his professional skill, but his personal investment in her well-being. To my bridge partner and dear friend, Patricia Williams, I leave my jewelry collection, with the exception of specific pieces designated elsewhere in this document, and the sum of $50,000. Patricia brought joy and laughter to my weekly routine, and I want her to have beautiful things to remember our friendship. Patricia Williams wiped away tears as she accepted the unexpected generosity. The jewelry collection was extensive and valuable, representing decades of Eleanor's appreciation for fine craftsmanship and timeless elegance. The bequest spoke to the genuine affection Eleanor had felt for someone who had shared simple pleasures and authentic friendship. As I continued reading the smaller bequests to longtime friends and charitable organizations, I could sense Jessica's growing impatience. She was clearly waiting for her name to be mentioned, expecting to hear about significant property transfers or business ownership stakes. Her posture remained confident, but I detected subtle signs of anxiety as the reading progressed without any mention of her supposed inheritance. David, meanwhile, was growing increasingly uncomfortable. The pattern of Eleanor's bequests was becoming clear. She was rewarding loyalty, service, and genuine relationship. The people being named were those who had provided authentic value to her life, without expectation of material reward. It was becoming obvious that Eleanor's generosity was specifically targeted toward character and integrity. To my nephew Thomas Mitchell, who has always conducted himself with honesty and worked diligently to build his own success without seeking handouts or shortcuts, I leave the downtown office building that houses his engineering firm, with the deed to be transferred free and clear. Additionally, Tom will receive ownership of 3 of my hotel properties, chosen because of his demonstrated ability to manage complex projects with integrity and attention to detail. Tom's eyes widened in shock as the magnitude of the bequest became clear. The office building alone was worth several $1,000,000, and the hotel properties represented not just immediate value but ongoing income potential. The gift would transform his family's financial future while acknowledging his character and work ethic. Eleanor wanted you to know, Tom, that she was proud of the man you became and the way you raised your family with strong values. She believed you would use this inheritance to continue building something meaningful for future generations. Lisa reached over to squeeze Tom's hand, both of them clearly overwhelmed by Eleanor's generosity and the recognition of their values. The bequest was substantial enough to change their lives dramatically while serving as validation of the choices they had made to prioritize integrity over easy money. The contrast between Tom's genuine surprise and gratitude versus Jessica's expectant confidence was becoming more pronounced. She was still waiting for her name to be called, still anticipating the moment when her financial future would be secured. The longer the reading continued without mention of her supposed inheritance, the more tightly wound she became. To my nephew David Mitchell, I continued, watching his face carefully as I spoke his name, I leave the sum of $500,000, with specific conditions attached to this bequest. David's relief was visible as his name was finally mentioned, though I could see him calculating whether $500,000 represented his full inheritance or merely the beginning of larger transfers. Jessica's face brightened as well, interpreting any bequest to David as confirmation that the family's wealth would ultimately benefit both of them. The conditions of David's inheritance are as follows, I read, feeling the weight of Eleanor's carefully chosen words. This bequest is contingent upon his demonstrating within 1 year of my death that he has resolved all personal deceptions and rebuilt his marriage on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Should these conditions not be met to the satisfaction of my designated evaluator, the bequest will instead be donated to the Children's Hospital Foundation in David's name. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face had gone white as the implications of Eleanor's words sank in. She had known about the affair, had known about the deceptions, and had structured his inheritance around correcting his behavior. The money was contingent not just on ending his relationship with Jessica, but on actively working to repair his marriage. Jessica's confident expression faltered for the first time since entering the conference room. The conditional nature of David's bequest suggested that Eleanor had been aware of problems in his marriage, problems that apparently needed to be resolved before any inheritance could be claimed. The implication was clear that David's current situation was incompatible with receiving Eleanor's financial legacy. Furthermore, I continued, Eleanor appointed me as the designated evaluator for these conditions, giving me sole discretion to determine whether David has met the requirements for receiving his inheritance. The power dynamic in the room shifted dramatically with this revelation. Eleanor had placed me in the position of judging whether David deserved his inheritance, creating a situation where his financial future depended entirely on my assessment of his character and behavior. The irony was exquisite. The wife he had been betraying now controlled his access to family wealth. David's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass, clearly struggling to process the full implications of Eleanor's conditions. Not only had his aunt known about his affair, but she had structured his inheritance as a test of his willingness to choose family loyalty over personal gratification. The $500,000 was substantial, but it came with a price that required genuine transformation rather than superficial compliance. Margaret Mitchell looked confused and concerned as she processed the conditional nature of her eldest son's inheritance. She had clearly been unaware of any serious problems in David's marriage, and Eleanor's words suggested family dynamics that had been hidden from her. The tension in the room was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. I don't understand, Margaret said quietly, looking between David and me with obvious bewilderment. What does Eleanor mean about personal deceptions and rebuilding the marriage? What conditions could she be referring to? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and I could see David struggling to find a response that wouldn't expose the full extent of his betrayal. Jessica had gone very still. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated as she began to grasp that Eleanor's knowledge of family dynamics had been far more comprehensive than anyone had realized. I think, David said carefully, his voice strained, that Aunt Eleanor was concerned about some of the pressures that business success can place on a marriage. She probably wanted to make sure that Sarah and I were communicating effectively and maintaining our partnership. The explanation was pathetically inadequate, and everyone in the room could sense that there were layers of truth being concealed. Eleanor's language had been too specific, too pointed, to be addressing general marital advice. She had been targeting particular deceptions and requiring specific corrections. Jessica cleared her throat delicately, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. I'm sure Eleanor's intentions were loving, wanting to see family relationships strengthened. But surely there are other bequests that address the broader family dynamic? The question revealed Jessica's continued expectation that her name would be mentioned, that her supposed relationship with Eleanor would be acknowledged through the will. She was still clinging to the narrative that David had constructed for her, still believing that Eleanor had viewed her as a future family member deserving of financial consideration. I looked at Jessica directly, seeing the hope and expectation in her eyes, knowing that the next few minutes would shatter every assumption she had made about her future. Eleanor had been thorough in her planning, anticipating exactly this moment and preparing for it with the strategic thinking that had built her business empire. There are indeed additional provisions, I said, returning my attention to the will document. Eleanor was very specific about addressing all aspects of her family relationships and ensuring that her legacy reflected her true values and priorities. The statement was deliberately ambiguous, allowing Jessica to maintain her hope while preparing the ground for the devastating revelations that were about to follow. I could see her posture straightening, her confidence beginning to return as she interpreted my words as confirmation that her inheritance was still forthcoming. David was watching me with growing alarm, beginning to understand that Eleanor's knowledge had been far more comprehensive than he had ever imagined. The conditional nature of his own inheritance suggested that his aunt had been aware of his affair, but the extent of her knowledge and the consequences she had planned remained unclear. Before continuing with the major bequests, I said, Eleanor asked me to share some additional context about her decision-making process. She wanted everyone to understand that her choices were based on careful observation of character, loyalty, and integrity over many years. I retrieved another document from the portfolio, one that Eleanor had prepared specifically for this moment. Her words had been chosen carefully to expose deception while maintaining the dignity appropriate for a legal proceeding. Eleanor wrote, I have been blessed with the opportunity to observe my family members in both public and private moments. I have seen some demonstrate unwavering loyalty and genuine love, while others have revealed themselves to be capable of deception and betrayal. My estate will reflect these observations, rewarding those who have earned trust and ensuring that those who have violated it understand the consequences of their choices. The words landed like individual hammer blows, each phrase adding weight to the growing understanding that Eleanor had been far more aware of family dynamics than anyone had realized. Jessica's face had begun to lose color as the implications became clearer, while David looked as if he might be physically ill. She specifically wanted to address the situation of individuals who might have been led to believe they would receive inheritance benefits based on false information or deceptive promises. Eleanor was adamant that no one should be allowed to benefit from lies or manipulation, regardless of who had told those lies or why. Jessica's breathing had become shallow, and I could see her beginning to grasp that her expectations might have been built on false foundations. The reference to false information and deceptive promises was too specific to be coincidental, too targeted to be addressing hypothetical situations. The conference room had become completely silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of downtown traffic filtering through the windows. Everyone present could sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment where hidden truths were about to be exposed and justice was about to be served. Eleanor had orchestrated this revelation with the same strategic brilliance that had built her business empire, ensuring that the truth would emerge in the most public and undeniable way possible. The stage was set for the complete destruction of the deceptions that had been carefully maintained for months, and I held in my hands the instrument of that revelation. As I prepared to continue reading Eleanor's will, I felt the weight of responsibility for delivering justice that had been so carefully planned. The next few minutes would change lives, expose lies, and demonstrate that Eleanor Mitchell's legacy would be built on truth rather than deception. The reckoning that was about to unfold would be swift, thorough, and absolutely devastating to those who had believed they could manipulate their way to wealth and family acceptance. The silence in the conference room stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. I could feel the weight of 11 pairs of eyes focused on me as I prepared to continue with Eleanor's will. The document in my hands felt heavier than its actual weight, laden with the power to reshape lives and expose carefully hidden truths. "We now come to the disposition of Eleanor's primary assets," I announced, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "These include the family mansion, the remaining hotel properties, her investment portfolio, and the controlling interest in Mitchell Hospitality Group." Jessica straightened in her chair, her hands smoothing the fabric of her dress with nervous energy. Despite the growing evidence that Eleanor's knowledge of family dynamics had been more comprehensive than expected, she still clung to her beliefs about her own inheritance. The mention of the mansion and hotel properties sparked a visible reaction, her eyes brightening with renewed hope. David leaned forward slightly, his face a mask of barely controlled anxiety. The conditional nature of his own inheritance had shaken him profoundly, but he still seemed to believe that the major assets would be distributed according to traditional family expectations. His fingers continued their nervous drumming against the table, a rhythm that had become increasingly frantic as the reading progressed. "Eleanor was particularly thoughtful about the family mansion," I continued, "the property that has served as the Mitchell family seat for over 40 years. She wanted to ensure that it would remain in hands that truly understood its history and significance." The Victorian mansion, perched in the hills overlooking Riverside, had been Eleanor's pride and joy. She had purchased it as a young woman with her first major business success, and had spent decades transforming it into a showcase of elegant living and gracious entertaining. The property was worth at least $15 million, representing not just financial value, but generations of family memories and social standing. Jessica's breathing had become more pronounced as she listened to my description of the mansion. I could see her mentally reviewing the renovation plans she had been discussing, the modifications she had been planning to make once she gained ownership. Her confidence was returning as she interpreted the reverent way I spoke about the property as confirmation that it would soon be hers to reshape according to her vision. "Eleanor wrote extensively about her decision regarding the mansion," I said, lifting a separate document that she had prepared specifically for this bequest. She wanted her reasoning to be clearly understood by everyone present. The additional documentation suggested that Eleanor had anticipated controversy around this particular inheritance, that she had prepared for questions and challenges that might arise. The very fact that she had written a separate justification indicated that her decision would likely surprise some family members. In her own words, Eleanor stated, "The family mansion represents more than brick and mortar. It embodies the values upon which the Mitchell family legacy was built: hard work, integrity, loyalty, and genuine love for one another. This property should only pass to someone who has demonstrated these qualities consistently over time, someone who understands that stewardship of family heritage requires more than appreciation for beautiful architecture." Jessica nodded along with Eleanor's words, clearly interpreting them as validation of her own supposed qualities. She had positioned herself as someone who appreciated the mansion's historical significance, someone with the taste and vision to preserve its character while updating it for modern living. Her expression reflected satisfaction at hearing her assumed values articulated so eloquently. Eleanor continued, "I have observed with great care how various family members and their associates have conducted themselves, particularly during times when they believed their actions were private and unobserved. Character reveals itself most clearly when people think no one is watching, when the stakes seem low, when temporary pleasure appears to outweigh long-term consequences." The words carried an ominous undertone that made David shift uncomfortably in his seat. The reference to private actions and unobserved behavior was becoming increasingly specific, suggesting that Eleanor's awareness of family secrets had been far more comprehensive than anyone had realized. His face had taken on a grayish pallor as he began to understand the full scope of his aunt's knowledge. "Therefore," I read, feeling the weight of Eleanor's carefully chosen words, "I leave the family mansion and its contents to Sarah Mitchell, my nephew's wife, who has demonstrated unwavering integrity, professional excellence, and genuine commitment to family values." Sarah has earned this inheritance through her character, her accomplishments, and her loyalty to the true meaning of family. The announcement hit the room like a physical blow. Jessica's face went completely white, her mouth opening in shock as she processed what she had just heard. The mansion that she had been planning to renovate, the property she had discussed with such casual ownership, had been left to the very woman whose marriage she had been helping to destroy. David's reaction was equally dramatic. His water glass slipped from his fingers, clattering against the mahogany table and sending droplets across the polished surface. He stared at me with an expression of complete disbelief, as if he couldn't quite process that his aunt had chosen to reward his wife, rather than maintaining traditional family inheritance patterns. Margaret Mitchell gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat as she absorbed the unexpected nature of Eleanor's decision. While she had always been fond of me, the choice to leave the family mansion to an in-law rather than a blood relative was unprecedented and shocking. Furthermore, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotional chaos erupting around the table, Eleanor has left to Sarah the controlling interest in Mitchell Hospitality Group, along with all associated properties, investments, and business assets. This transfer includes the remaining 12 hotel properties, the corporate headquarters building, and all subsidiary businesses developed under the Mitchell Hospitality umbrella. Jessica made a sound that was part gasp, part sob, as the full magnitude of what she was hearing became clear. The hotel properties that she had been discussing so casually, the business empire that she had been planning to help modernize and expand, had all been left to the woman she had been betraying. The irony was so complete, so devastating, that it seemed almost choreographed for maximum emotional impact. Eleanor included a personal letter for Sarah, I said, retrieving an envelope with my name written in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. She asked that it be read aloud so that everyone would understand her reasoning. I opened the envelope with careful precision, aware that every person in the room was hanging on my every movement. Eleanor's words would provide the final explanation for her shocking decisions, the reasoning that would make her intentions undeniably clear. My dear Sarah, I read, feeling Eleanor's presence in every word. If you are hearing this letter, it means that my final wishes are being revealed to our family. I want you to know that every decision I made regarding my estate was based on careful observation of character, integrity, and genuine family loyalty. Jessica's breathing had become audible as she struggled to maintain her composure. The personal nature of Eleanor's letter to me, combined with the massive inheritance I had just received, was destroying every assumption she had made about her own future and her supposed relationship with Eleanor. I have watched you build a successful career while maintaining your commitment to family values. I have seen you handle professional challenges with grace and personal difficulties with dignity. When others around you have chosen deception and betrayal, you have remained true to your principles. The reference to deception and betrayal was unmistakable in its targeting. Eleanor had known about David's affair, had known about the lies and manipulation that had been used to justify it, and had chosen to structure her inheritance as a response to those betrayals. You deserve to inherit not just my property and business interests, but the security and independence that come with financial freedom. Use these assets to build the life you truly deserve, one based on honesty, respect, and genuine partnership. David had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking, as the full weight of Eleanor's judgment became clear. His aunt had not only known about his affair but had chosen to punish him for it in the most public and humiliating way possible. His inheritance was conditional and minimal, while his wife received the lion's share of the family wealth. Eleanor concludes, I read, feeling the power of her final words, by saying, I trust that this inheritance will provide Sarah with both the means and the motivation to make choices about her future based on what truly serves her happiness and well-being, rather than what others expect or demand of her. The message was clear and unambiguous. Eleanor was not just rewarding my character and loyalty, she was providing me with the financial independence to make decisions about my marriage and my future without being constrained by economic dependence on David. The inheritance was liberation as much as it was reward. Jessica had begun to cry, quiet tears streaming down her face as she absorbed the complete destruction of her expectations. The woman sitting across from her, the woman she had been betraying for months, now controlled the very assets that she had been planning to inherit and manage. The hotel properties, the mansion, the business empire, everything she had been dreaming about belonged to someone else. There is one additional bequest that Eleanor specifically requested be addressed, I said, returning to the main will document. She wanted to ensure that all interested parties understood her complete intentions regarding her estate. Jessica looked up through her tears, a flicker of desperate hope crossing her features. Perhaps there was still some provision for her, some acknowledgement of her supposed relationship with Eleanor, some financial consideration that would salvage something from the wreckage of her expectations. To Jessica Parker, I read, watching her face carefully, who has been led to believe that she would inherit portions of my estate based on false representations and deceptive promises, I leave the following message and bequest. Jessica straightened slightly, wiping her tears as she prepared to hear what Eleanor had left for her. Despite everything that had already been revealed, she still clung to the possibility that Eleanor had made some provision for her future, some acknowledgement of her supposed place in the family. Eleanor wrote, Miss Parker, if you are hearing this bequest, it means that you have been the victim of lies and manipulation designed to exploit your emotions and expectations. The person who led you to believe that you would inherit my property or business interests was neither authorized to make such promises nor in possession of accurate information about my intentions. The words hit Jessica like a series of physical blows. Eleanor had known about her, had known about the promises David had made, and had chosen to address her directly in the will. But rather than providing an inheritance, Eleanor was exposing the lies that had been used to manipulate her. I met you once, briefly, at a family gathering. During that encounter, I observed nothing that would suggest a meaningful relationship between us or any basis for including you in my estate planning. The promises that were apparently made to you about your future inheritance were fabrications designed to serve someone else's purposes, not reflections of my actual intentions or feelings. David's face had gone from gray to red as Eleanor's words exposed the elaborate deception he had constructed. He had not only lied to Jessica about being separated from me, but had also fabricated Eleanor's approval and promised inheritance that had never existed. The depth of his manipulation was being revealed in the most public and humiliating way possible. However, Eleanor continued, I do not believe that you should leave this experience empty-handed. To Jessica Parker, I leave the sum of $10,000, along with this advice. True security and happiness come from building your own success rather than depending on others to provide it for you. Use this money to invest in your own talents and ambitions, rather than your assumptions about other people's wealth. The $10,000 bequest was simultaneously generous and insulting. It was enough money to be meaningful, but small enough to emphasize how completely Jessica had misunderstood her position in Eleanor's affections. The accompanying advice made it clear that Eleanor viewed her as someone who had been seeking unearned wealth, rather than working to build her own success. Jessica stared at me in complete disbelief, her mouth moving soundlessly as she struggled to process what she had just heard. $10,000 instead of millions? Advice about building her own success instead of recognition as a future family matriarch. Acknowledgement that she had been manipulated rather than loved and accepted. Eleanor's final provision, I read, addresses the overall distribution of her remaining assets. After all specific bequests have been fulfilled, the residual estate, valued at approximately $8 million, will be divided equally between established charities focused on women's education and entrepreneurship, with the donations to be made in the name of, quote, women who build their own success through integrity and hard work. The charitable donations served as Eleanor's final statement about her values. Rather than leaving additional money to family members who had disappointed her, she was investing in the future success of women who embodied the qualities she most admired. The donation would create lasting impact while serving as a permanent reminder of the principles that had guided her life and her estate planning. The conference room had fallen into complete silence as the full scope of Eleanor's will became clear. She had rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal with surgical precision, using her wealth to deliver justice and provide security to those who had earned it. The reading had revealed not just financial decisions, but a comprehensive judgment on the character and choices of everyone involved. Margaret Mitchell was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor knew. She knew everything. This simple statement captured the profound shock that everyone was experiencing. Eleanor had not been the naive, trusting family matriarch that some had apparently believed her to be. She had been fully aware of the deceptions, the affair, the lies, and the manipulation, and she had responded with the strategic brilliance that had built her business empire. Jessica had begun sobbing openly, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. The woman who had entered the conference room expecting to inherit millions was leaving with $10,000 and the knowledge that she had been a pawn in someone else's deceptive game. Her dreams of renovating the mansion, expanding the hotel business, and securing her financial future had been revealed as elaborate fantasies built on lies. David remained hunched over the table, his face buried in his hands as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of his public humiliation. His inheritance was conditional and required him to demonstrate integrity and rebuild his marriage, while his wife had received the bulk of the family wealth. Eleanor had essentially made him financially dependent on my goodwill and assessment of his character. Tom and Lisa sat in stunned silence, clearly overwhelmed by both their own unexpected inheritance and the revelation of family secrets they had never suspected. The hotel properties they had inherited would change their lives dramatically, but the emotional impact of learning about David's affair and Eleanor's response was equally profound. Dr. Crawford and Patricia Williams exchanged meaningful glances, their own generous bequests suddenly taking on additional significance as rewards for genuine relationship and loyalty. They had been valued for their authentic connections with Eleanor, while others had been judged for their deceptions and manipulations. As I gathered the will documents and prepared to conclude the formal reading, I reflected on Eleanor's extraordinary planning and execution. She had used her final act to deliver justice, provide security, and expose truth in a way that would resonate far beyond this single morning. The inheritance she had left me was not just financial freedom, but the power to make decisions about my future based on my own values rather than economic necessity. The reckoning Eleanor had planned was complete, swift, and absolutely devastating to those who had believed they could manipulate their way to wealth and family acceptance. Justice had been served with the precision and thoroughness that had characterized all of Eleanor's business dealings, and the consequences would reshape the family dynamic for generations to come. The formal conclusion of Eleanor's will reading left the conference room in a state of profound shock and transformation. As I gathered the legal documents and placed them carefully back into the leather portfolio, I could feel the weight of 11 different emotional reactions pressing against the mahogany walls of our prestigious meeting space. The morning sun had shifted position during our proceedings, now casting longer shadows across the polished table where lives had been irrevocably changed. Jessica remained in her chair as if physically incapable of movement, her hands gripping the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. The tears had stopped flowing, replaced by a hollow expression that spoke to someone grappling with the complete destruction of their perceived reality. Her emerald dress, which had seemed so sophisticated and appropriate when she entered, now appeared almost garish against her pale complexion. The confident woman who had discussed renovation plans for properties she would never own had been replaced by someone who looked utterly lost. "I need to understand," Jessica said finally, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the stunned silence. How long did she know? How long was Eleanor aware of everything? The question hung in the air like an accusation, directed not at me but at David, who remained hunched over the table as if the weight of his aunt's judgment might physically crush him. When he didn't respond, Jessica's voice grew stronger, fueled by a mixture of humiliation and growing anger. "David, answer me. How long did your aunt know about us? When did she find out that everything you told me was a lie?" David slowly lifted his head, revealing a face that had aged years in the span of a few hours. His eyes were bloodshot, his complexion ashen, and his usual confident demeanor had been completely stripped away. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion and defeat. "I don't know," he said honestly, though the admission seemed to cost him considerable effort. "I thought she didn't know anything. I thought we were being careful. That our relationship was private. I never imagined she was aware of the situation, let alone that she had such detailed knowledge about everything." Jessica's laugh was bitter and devoid of any humor. "Careful? You told me your wife didn't care about your marriage. You told me Eleanor loved me and wanted to welcome me into the family. You let me quit my job because I thought I was about to inherit millions of dollars. How exactly were we being careful? The recitation of David's lies was devastating in its clarity. Each deception Jessica listed added another layer to the understanding of how thoroughly she had been manipulated. Her decision to quit her interior design position, which had provided her with independence and professional identity, now appeared as just another casualty of David's elaborate deception. Margaret Mitchell finally found her voice, though it carried the tremor of a mother confronting the complete moral failure of her eldest son. David, how could you do such a thing? How could you lie to this woman about Eleanor's feelings? How could you make promises about inheritance that were never yours to make? The questions from his mother seemed to break something fundamental in David's composure. He began to cry, not the controlled tears of grief, but the desperate sobbing of someone who had finally grasped the magnitude of their own destruction. His entire life had been built on charm, manipulation, and the assumption that he could talk his way out of any consequences. Eleanor's will had stripped away all of those defenses, leaving him exposed and powerless. I thought, David said between sobs, I thought if Eleanor got to know Jessica, she would see what I saw in her. I thought if I could just buy some time, if I could make Jessica feel secure and wanted, then maybe everything would work out somehow. The explanation was pathetic in its self-serving logic. David had created an elaborate fantasy world where his deceptions would somehow magically transform into truth, where his manipulation of two women would result in a happy ending for everyone involved. The delusion was staggering in its scope and its complete disconnection from reality. Tom Mitchell, who had been sitting in stunned silence since learning about his own substantial inheritance, finally spoke up. His voice carried the disappointment of a younger brother who had always looked up to his sibling, only to discover that his hero was built on lies and manipulation. You used Aunt Eleanor's memory to manipulate Jessica, Tom said, his words cutting through David's sobs like a blade. You took advantage of her respect for our family and her desire to belong somewhere. That's not love, David. That's psychological abuse. The clinical accuracy of Tom's assessment seemed to hit Jessica like a physical blow. She had been psychologically abused, manipulated through her own desires for security and belonging. David had identified her vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically, using his family's wealth and status as weapons in his campaign of deception. 8 months, Jessica said, her voice growing stronger as understanding dawned. For 8 months, I believed I was building a relationship with a man who is separated from his wife and approved of by his family. I made life decisions based on those beliefs. I changed my career trajectory, my living situation, my entire future planning. She stood up from the table with sudden determination, her movements sharp and decisive. The shock was wearing off, being replaced by anger and a growing sense of her own agency. The woman who had been passively receiving devastating news was transforming into someone ready to take control of her own narrative. I'm going to ask you one more time, David, and I want the complete truth. When you told me that Sarah was cold and distant and didn't care about your marriage, was any of that true? When you said Eleanor wanted to meet me and was excited about our relationship, was there even a grain of truth in those statements? David's continued sobbing provided its own answer, but Jessica demanded verbal confirmation of what she already knew. She had been systematically lied to about every aspect of her situation, from David's marital status to Eleanor's supposed approval of their relationship. No, David finally managed to say, none of it was true. Sarah never stopped caring about our marriage. She was working 18-hour days to build something meaningful, and I resented her success instead of supporting it. And Eleanor met you once, for maybe 10 minutes at a family gathering. She never expressed any interest in getting to know you better. The confession was complete and devastating. Jessica had built her entire relationship with David on false information, had made major life decisions based on carefully constructed lies, and had spent months unknowingly betraying a woman who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. Dr. Crawford, who had remained quietly observant throughout the emotional confrontations, finally spoke with the measured wisdom of someone who had counseled families through difficult transitions. Jessica, you're not responsible for the lies that were told to you. You made decisions based on information you believed to be true. The responsibility for this situation lies entirely with the person who created and maintained the deceptions. The validation from a respected family friend seemed to provide Jessica with additional strength. She was the victim of manipulation, not a willing participant in a scheme to defraud the family. Her anger was justified, her sense of betrayal was legitimate, and her right to feel violated by the systematic deception was absolute. "What I don't understand," Margaret said, looking directly at me for the first time since the shocking inheritance announcements, "is how Eleanor knew so much about the situation. Sarah, did you tell her about David's affair?" The question put me in the spotlight for the first time since the formal reading had concluded. I had been observing the emotional destruction around the table while processing my own complex feelings about Eleanor's extraordinary generosity and the justice she had delivered. Now I needed to explain my own role in the events that had led to this moment. Eleanor called me into her hospital room about 3 weeks before she passed away, I said, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the memory. She told me that she knew about David's affair and had known for several months. She said she had been having him followed by a private investigator because she was concerned about some of his financial requests and wanted to understand his true situation. The revelation that Eleanor had employed professional surveillance added another layer to the understanding of her comprehensive knowledge. She had not stumbled upon information about David's affair. She had actively sought it out as part of her evaluation of his character and fitness to inherit her wealth. Eleanor told me that she had initially hoped David would end the affair on his own and recommit to our marriage, I continued. But as the months passed and his behavior became more deceptive rather than more honest, she realized that intervention was necessary. The will was her way of forcing accountability and providing justice. Jessica absorbed this information with visible effort, clearly struggling to understand that she had been under surveillance, while believing herself to be conducting a private relationship. The invasion of privacy was profound, but it had been motivated by Eleanor's desire to protect her family's assets from someone she viewed as untrustworthy. She knew everything, Jessica said, more to herself than to anyone else. She knew about the restaurants we went to, the hotels we stayed at, the plans we made together. She knew I had quit my job and was making arrangements based on inheriting her property. The comprehensiveness of Eleanor's knowledge was indeed staggering. She had been aware not just of the affair itself, but of the specific lies David had told, the promises he had made, and the life changes Jessica had implemented based on false expectations. Her will had been crafted to address each element of the deception with surgical precision. Lisa Chen, who had been quietly processing the family drama while supporting her husband through his own emotional reactions, finally spoke with the practical wisdom that had always characterized her approach to complex situations. "Jessica, you need to think about what you're going to do next. You have $10,000. And the truth about your situation. That's more than many people have when they're starting over." The advice was compassionate, but realistic. Jessica's dreams of inherited wealth had been destroyed. But she still had options and opportunities if she was willing to rebuild her life on honest foundations. The money Eleanor had left her, while a fraction of her expectations, was still substantial enough to provide a fresh start. "I need to get my job back," Jessica said with growing determination, "or find a new position in interior design. I need to rebuild my career and my independence. I can't believe I gave up my professional identity for promises that were never real." The practical planning seemed to provide Jessica with a sense of agency and control that had been absent since the devastating will reading began. She was moving from victim to survivor, from passive recipient of others' decisions to active architect of her own future. Tom cleared his throat and addressed Jessica directly, his voice carrying genuine kindness despite the family loyalty that aligned him with me, rather than with the woman who had been involved with his brother. "Jessica, I want you to know that none of us blame you for this situation. You were lied to and manipulated. If you need references for employment, or if there's anything we can do to help you rebuild your career, please don't hesitate to ask." The generosity of Tom's offer, particularly given the circumstances, seemed to move Jessica to tears again. But these were different tears, grateful rather than devastated, appreciative rather than bitter. She was beginning to understand that the Mitchell family's anger was directed at David's behavior, not at her own victimization. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you can know. I'm going to take Eleanor's advice and focus on building something that's genuinely mine. Something that can't be taken away by other people's lies." As the immediate emotional crisis began to settle into a new reality, I found myself reflecting on Eleanor's extraordinary gift to me. The mansion, the business empire, the financial independence. All of it represented more than wealth. It represented the power to make choices about my future based on my own values rather than economic necessity. "I have something to say," I announced, standing from my position at the head of the conference table. The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to me, perhaps expecting additional revelations or announcements about Eleanor's estate. "David," I said, looking directly at my husband for the first time since the reading began, "Eleanor's will makes your inheritance conditional on rebuilding our marriage with honesty and mutual respect. But I want you to understand that receiving that money is the least important decision you have to make right now." David looked up at me with desperate hope, clearly interpreting my words as a possible path toward redemption and reconciliation. But I had not finished speaking, and my next words would make my intentions unmistakably clear. "The money doesn't matter because our marriage is over," I said, my voice calm but final. "Eleanor's inheritance has given me the financial independence to make that decision based on what's best for me, rather than what's economically necessary. I'm filing for divorce, and I'll be using the assets Eleanor left me to build a life that reflects the values she believed I possessed." The announcement hit David like a final, devastating blow. His conditional inheritance would never be claimed because the condition, rebuilding our marriage, was impossible to meet. Eleanor had structured his bequest knowing that I would choose independence over reconciliation, that justice would ultimately be served through my own decisions, rather than through financial punishment alone. Margaret Mitchell nodded slowly, her expression reflecting both sadness and understanding. "Eleanor knew you would make that choice," she said quietly. "She was giving you the resources to choose freedom over obligation. That's what she meant when she wrote about providing you with motivation to make decisions based on what truly serves your happiness." The insight was profound and accurate. Eleanor had not just rewarded my loyalty and character, she had provided me with the means to choose my own future without being constrained by financial dependence on someone who had betrayed my trust. The inheritance was empowerment as much as it was recognition. Jessica gathered her purse and stood to leave, her movements reflecting someone who had made peace with a difficult situation and was ready to move forward. Before reaching the door, she turned back to address the room one final time. "I want to apologize to everyone for my part in this situation," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "I should have asked more questions, should have insisted on meeting Eleanor myself, should have been more skeptical of promises that seemed too good to be true. I'm sorry for the pain my presence has caused this family." The apology was gracious and appropriate, reflecting someone who had learned difficult lessons about trust and verification. Her willingness to accept responsibility for her own choices, while still acknowledging the manipulation she had endured, spoke to genuine character growth emerging from devastating circumstances. "You have nothing to apologize for," I replied, meaning it completely. "You were told lies by someone who knew better. Eleanor was right when she said you deserve to know the truth about your situation." As Jessica left the conference room, her departure marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another for everyone involved. David would have to rebuild his life without the financial cushion he had expected, and without the wife he had betrayed. The conditional inheritance would remain unclaimed, eventually donated to charity as Eleanor had specified. Tom and Lisa would use their inheritance to build something meaningful for their family, while maintaining the values that had earned Eleanor's respect and generosity. The hotel properties would provide them with financial security, while serving as ongoing reminders of the importance of integrity and genuine family loyalty. Margaret would have to reconcile herself to her eldest son's moral failure, while finding comfort in the knowledge that Eleanor's wealth would ultimately benefit those who had demonstrated true character. The family dynamics would be forever changed, but perhaps strengthened by the removal of deception and manipulation. As I prepared to leave the law firm and begin implementing Eleanor's final wishes, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for her wisdom and foresight. She had used her last act to deliver justice, provide security, and create opportunities for honest new beginnings. The inheritance she had left me was not just financial assets, but the chance to build a life based on truth rather than compromise. The conference room gradually emptied as family members and friends departed to process the morning's revelations and plan their next steps. The mahogany table that had witnessed so much drama and transformation was left empty, waiting for the next family gathering that would be fundamentally different from everything that had come before. Eleanor Mitchell had achieved in death what she had accomplished throughout her life, the creation of lasting change through strategic thinking, careful planning, and unwavering commitment to her values. Her legacy would live on not just in the businesses and properties she had built, but in the lives she had transformed through her final act of justice and generosity. The inheritance had been read, the truth had been revealed, and justice had been served. The next chapter would be written by those who remained, armed with the resources and wisdom Eleanor had provided to build something better from the ashes of deception and betrayal. The morning mist clung to the Victorian mansion's gardens as I stood on the wraparound porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the hills of Riverside in shades of gold and amber. 6 months had passed since that devastating will reading, and the transformation in my life felt as dramatic as the changing seasons. The mansion that Eleanor had left me had become more than just a home. It had become a symbol of rebirth and the foundation for building something entirely new. The renovations I had undertaken were subtle but meaningful, designed to honor Eleanor's memory while making the space truly mine. The library where she had spent countless hours reading and planning had been converted into my home office, complete with state-of-the-art technology for managing the hotel empire she had entrusted to me. The morning room where she had entertained her bridge club now served as my private retreat, filled with plants and artwork that reflected my own aesthetic sensibilities. Running Mitchell Hospitality Group had proven to be both challenging and deeply rewarding. Eleanor's business acumen had created solid foundations, but the industry required constant adaptation and innovation. I had spent months immersing myself in every aspect of the operation, from staffing decisions at individual properties to strategic planning for expansion opportunities. The 12 hotels under the Mitchell umbrella each had their own character and clientele, requiring customized approaches to management and development. My legal background had proven invaluable in navigating the complexities of hospitality management. Contract negotiations, regulatory compliance, and risk management were areas where my expertise translated directly into business success. The staff had initially been skeptical of my ability to fill Eleanor's shoes, but my systematic approach and genuine respect for their knowledge had gradually won their confidence and support. The most satisfying aspect of my new role had been implementing Eleanor's vision for employee development and advancement. She had believed that successful businesses were built on the foundation of well-trained, well-compensated staff who felt valued and invested in the company's success. I had expanded the employee education programs, increased healthcare benefits, and created clear pathways for advancement within the organization. Jessica Parker had surprised everyone, including herself, by successfully rebuilding her interior design career. The $10,000 Eleanor had left her had been invested wisely in new equipment, portfolio development, and marketing materials. She had approached her professional resurrection with the kind of determination that comes from surviving complete devastation and discovering inner strength you never knew you possessed. Her first major project after the inheritance debacle had been redesigning the lobby of one of Tom's inherited hotel properties. The irony had not been lost on any of us, but Jessica had approached the work with professionalism and creativity that impressed everyone involved. The project had led to additional contracts and referrals, gradually rebuilding her reputation and client base. Jessica and I had developed an unexpected friendship born from shared experience and mutual respect. She had been devastated by David's betrayal, but she had chosen to channel her anger into productive action rather than destructive revenge. Our monthly coffee meetings had become a source of support and perspective for both of us, proof that even the most painful circumstances could lead to genuine connection and growth. During one of our recent conversations, Jessica had shared her reflections on the events that had brought us together. I realize now that I was looking for someone else to provide me with security and status instead of building those things for myself, she had said. Eleanor's final gift to me wasn't just the money. It was the wake-up call I needed to take responsibility for my own life. Her insight had been profound and hard-won. The woman who had once planned to renovate someone else's mansion was now designing her own future with the same attention to detail and creative vision. She had learned that true security came from personal accomplishment rather than association with wealthy men, and her business was thriving as a result of this fundamental shift in perspective. David's transformation had been far more painful to witness. The conditional inheritance that Eleanor had structured for him would never be claimed because the condition, rebuilding our marriage through honesty and mutual respect, had become impossible to fulfill. The divorce proceedings had been swift and amicable, with Eleanor's inheritance providing me with the financial independence to be generous in the settlement without compromising my own security. The loss of his expected inheritance, combined with the public humiliation of the will reading, had forced David to confront the reality of his choices and their consequences. He had entered therapy, not as a performative gesture designed to win back my affections, but as a genuine attempt to understand how he had become someone capable of such elaborate deception and manipulation. Eleanor Mitchell had been instrumental in encouraging David's psychological treatment. The shock of discovering her eldest son's capacity for cruelty had been devastating, but her response had been to demand accountability rather than make excuses. She had refused to enable his self-pity or provide financial support that would allow him to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. Eleanor knew what she was doing when she structured David's inheritance that way. Margaret had confided to me during one of our regular lunch meetings. She was giving him one final chance to choose integrity over selfishness, knowing that you would make the decision that served your own well-being rather than his convenience. The insight had been accurate and painful. Eleanor had understood that David's pattern of manipulation and deception was unlikely to change without dramatic intervention. By making his inheritance conditional on genuine personal transformation, she had created a situation where he would either rise to meet the challenge or face the full consequences of his choices. The real estate development company that David had built was struggling without the financial backing he had expected from Eleanor's estate. Several major projects had been delayed or canceled, as investors became aware of his personal circumstances and questioned his judgment and reliability. The professional reputation he had cultivated over decades was being systematically dismantled by the revelation of his private character. Tom and Lisa had used their inheritance to create something beautiful and lasting. The hotel properties Eleanor had left them had been carefully renovated and repositioned to serve a more upscale clientele while maintaining the warm, welcoming atmosphere that had made them successful. Tom's engineering background had proved invaluable in the renovation process, and Lisa's natural hospitality skills had enhanced the guest experience significantly. Their success had been particularly gratifying because it validated Eleanor's judgment about character and potential. She had recognized their integrity and work ethic, and had provided them with opportunities that matched their abilities and values. The properties they now managed were thriving under their stewardship, generating substantial income while serving as sources of pride and accomplishment. The charitable donations that Eleanor had specified in her will were creating lasting impact in the community. The women's education and entrepreneurship programs that bore her name were providing scholarships, mentoring, and business development support to women who embodied the values she had prized. The foundation had already helped dozens of women start or expand their own businesses, creating a ripple effect of economic empowerment and independence. My involvement with the foundation had become one of the most meaningful aspects of my new life. Working with women who were building their own success through determination and hard work reminded me daily of the values that had earned Eleanor's respect and generosity. The foundation board meetings were energizing and inspiring, filled with stories of courage, innovation, and triumph over adversity. One particular scholarship recipient had made a profound impression on me. Maria Rodriguez, a single mother of 3, had used her grant to complete her certification in hospitality management and had subsequently been hired as an assistant manager at one of the Mitchell properties. Her work ethic, attention to detail, and genuine care for guest satisfaction had earned her rapid promotion and increased responsibilities. Maria's success story embodied everything Eleanor had hoped to achieve through her charitable giving. She was building security and independence for her family while contributing to the success of businesses that served the community. Her children were seeing firsthand that hard work and integrity led to real opportunities and lasting accomplishment. The legal practice that I had built over the years had also evolved in response to my new circumstances. With financial independence came the freedom to be more selective about clients and cases, focusing on work that aligned with my values and interests. I had begun specializing in estate planning and business succession, helping other successful individuals create legacies that reflected their principles and priorities. The experience of executing Eleanor's will had taught me valuable lessons about the power of strategic planning and the importance of clear communication about values and expectations. I had developed a reputation for creating comprehensive estate plans that addressed both financial and emotional considerations, helping families avoid the kind of conflicts and revelations that had characterized our own experience. One of my recent clients had been a successful entrepreneur who wanted to ensure that her business empire would continue to reflect her commitment to environmental sustainability and social responsibility. Working with her to structure ownership transfers and charitable giving strategies had been deeply satisfying, knowing that her legacy would continue to create positive impact long after her death. The downtown law firm where I had worked for years had offered me a senior partnership position, recognizing both my legal expertise and my enhanced understanding of wealth management and family dynamics. The promotion had come with increased responsibility and the opportunity to mentor younger attorneys who were developing their own practices in estate planning and business law. My new role at the firm had also provided opportunities to speak at professional conferences and write articles for legal publications about innovative approaches to estate planning and family business succession. The visibility had attracted additional high-net-worth clients who appreciated my combination of legal expertise and real-world experience with complex family dynamics. The mansion itself had become a gathering place for friends, family, and business associates. Eleanor's tradition of hosting elegant dinner parties and charitable fundraisers had been revived and adapted to reflect my own style and interests. The formal dining room that had witnessed so many important family discussions now served as the setting for foundation board meetings and strategic planning sessions. The gardens that Eleanor had lovingly maintained had become my own passion project. Working with a team of skilled horticulturists, I had expanded the plantings to include a vegetable garden that supplied fresh produce to the hotel restaurants and a greenhouse that allowed for year-round cultivation of specialty herbs and flowers. The physical work of gardening had become a source of relaxation and meditation, providing balance to the intellectual demands of business management and legal practice. The transformation of the mansion's carriage house into a guest cottage had created a perfect retreat for visiting family members and out-of-town business associates. Tom and Lisa had been frequent visitors, often staying for weekend getaways that allowed us to maintain the close family relationships that had been strengthened by our shared experience of Eleanor's final judgment and generosity. Margaret Mitchell had become a regular presence at family gatherings, her relationship with me deepened by our shared commitment to honoring Eleanor's memory and supporting the values she had embodied. The pain of David's betrayal had been profound, but it had also strengthened the bonds between the family members who had remained true to their principles. Our holiday celebrations had taken on new meaning and significance. The Christmas gathering held at the mansion had been filled with genuine warmth and gratitude, unmarred by the tension and deception that had characterized previous family events. The children in the family were growing up in an environment where honesty and integrity were celebrated and rewarded, rather than being treated as optional conveniences. The professional recognition I had received for my success in both legal practice and business management had been gratifying, but the personal satisfaction of building something meaningful and lasting had been even more rewarding. Eleanor's inheritance had provided me with resources, but the true gift had been the freedom to make choices based on my own values and vision for the future. The divorce from David had been finalized with minimal drama and maximum dignity. The settlement had been fair and reasonable, reflecting my financial independence and my desire to close that chapter of my life with grace rather than bitterness. David had accepted the terms without contest, perhaps understanding that my generosity was a reflection of my character rather than weakness or continued attachment. The legal documents that formally ended our marriage had been signed in the same conference room where Eleanor's will had been read, providing a symbolic completion of the transformation that had begun with her final act of justice and generosity. The morning light streaming through the same windows had seemed to bless the new beginning that the divorce represented. As I stood on the mansion's porch watching the sun complete its rise over the hills that had witnessed so much change and growth, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. Eleanor's legacy lived on not just in the businesses and properties she had left behind, but in the lives she had touched and the values she had championed. The woman who had entered that conference room 6 months ago, still clinging to the hope that her marriage could be saved, had been transformed into someone who understood that true security came from personal strength and integrity, rather than dependence on others. The inheritance had provided resources, but the real gift had been the clarity to recognize my own worth and the courage to build a life that reflected my true values. The telephone rang inside the mansion, likely a call from one of the hotel managers or a client seeking legal counsel. The business of living and growing and building something meaningful continued, supported by the foundation that Eleanor had so carefully and lovingly provided. Her final gift had been more than money or property. It had been the opportunity to become the person she had always believed I could be. The morning mist was lifting from the gardens, revealing the full beauty of the landscape that Eleanor had cultivated and I had inherited. The metaphor was perfect and profound, the temporary obscurity giving way to clear vision, the hidden becoming visible, the potential being realized through patience, care, and time. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibility, built on the solid foundation of truth, integrity, and genuine accomplishment. Eleanor's legacy would continue to grow and evolve, touching lives and creating opportunities for generations to come. The justice she had delivered had been complete and lasting, transforming not just individual lives but the very definition of what it meant to succeed, and to build something worthy of inheritance. The golden anniversary celebration of Mitchell Hospitality Group was in full swing on the mansion's grand terrace, overlooking the city lights of Riverside twinkling like stars in the valley below. 2 years had passed since that life-changing will reading, and tonight's gathering represented the culmination of Eleanor's vision being realized in ways she could never have imagined. The terrace, decorated with elegant white lights and surrounded by the fragrant blooms of the gardens I had expanded, hosted nearly 200 guests who had come to celebrate not just a business milestone, but the transformation of a family legacy. Standing near the marble balustrade, I watched the animated conversations and genuine laughter that filled the evening air. The guest list represented a carefully curated mixture of business associates, family members, foundation beneficiaries, and community leaders who had played roles in the remarkable growth and evolution of Eleanor's empire. The woman who had once sat in a conference room, discovering her husband's betrayal, now moved through the crowd as a recognized leader in both business and philanthropy. The Mitchell Hospitality Group had expanded from 12 properties to 18 under my leadership, each acquisition carefully selected to align with Eleanor's original vision while adapting to modern travelers' expectations. The newest property, a boutique hotel in San Francisco's Union Square, had been designed specifically to showcase the work of local artists and entrepreneurs, creating a showcase for creative talent while providing luxurious accommodations for discerning guests. Dr. Patricia Williams, Eleanor's former bridge partner and now a member of the foundation board, approached me with a champagne flute and a warm smile that carried the satisfaction of witnessing justice perfectly served. At 78, she moved with the same grace that had made her Eleanor's closest confidant, and her presence at tonight's celebration represented the continuity between Eleanor's original vision and its current manifestation. "Eleanor would be so proud," Patricia said, gesturing toward the crowd of successful, accomplished individuals who had gathered to honor the legacy she had created. She always said that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the positive impact you could have on other people's lives. "Look at what you've built from the foundation she provided." The observation was both accurate and deeply moving. The foundation that bore Eleanor's name had distributed over $2 million in grants and scholarships during the past 2 years, directly supporting 127 women in their entrepreneurial endeavors. The ripple effects of that investment were visible throughout the evening's gathering, as scholarship recipients mingled with business leaders, creating networks and opportunities that would continue to generate positive impact for years to come. Maria Rodriguez, the single mother who had been among the foundation's first scholarship recipients, now served as the regional manager for 3 of the Mitchell properties. Her success story had become a template for the foundation's approach, demonstrating how strategic investment in character and potential could create lasting transformation. Tonight, she was accompanied by her eldest daughter, who had just been accepted to UC Berkeley's business program with a scholarship from the foundation. "Mrs. Mitchell," Maria said, using the title that had become natural despite my repeated invitations to use my first name, "I wanted to introduce you to someone special. This is Angela Martinez. She's opening a catering business using one of our foundation grants, and she's already been selected to provide services for 2 of our hotel properties." Angela Martinez was a petite woman in her 30s with the kind of focused intensity that characterized successful entrepreneurs. Her handshake was firm and confident, her smile genuine and warm. The catering business she had launched specialized in farm-to-table cuisine, using locally sourced ingredients, perfectly aligning with the sustainable practices that had become a hallmark of the Mitchell brand. "Ms. Martinez," I said, genuinely pleased to meet another example of the foundation's success. "Maria tells me you're already working with our properties. How has the partnership been developing?" "It's been incredible," Angela replied, her voice carrying the enthusiasm that comes from seeing dreams become reality. "The foundation grant allowed me to purchase professional equipment and complete my business certification. But more importantly, the mentoring program connected me with established business owners who helped me understand the hospitality industry's expectations and standards." The mentoring program had been my own addition to Eleanor's original charitable vision, recognizing that financial support alone was insufficient for sustainable business success. Each grant recipient was paired with experienced professionals who provided guidance, connections, and ongoing support throughout the critical early stages of business development. The program had resulted in a 93% success rate for businesses launched with foundation support. Tom Mitchell and his wife Lisa approached our small group, both of them radiating the contentment and confidence that came from building something meaningful together. The hotel properties they had inherited had been transformed into showcase destinations, with Tom's engineering expertise creating efficient, sustainable operations, while Lisa's hospitality background ensured exceptional guest experiences. Their success had been so remarkable that they had been invited to speak at industry conferences about family business management and sustainable tourism practices. "Sarah," Tom said, embracing me with the warmth that had characterized our relationship since that devastating and transformative will reading, "the numbers from the quarterly reports are incredible. The occupancy rates across all properties are the highest they've been in 5 years, and guest satisfaction scores are consistently exceeding industry benchmarks." The business success was gratifying, but the personal satisfaction of working with family members who shared Eleanor's values was even more meaningful. Tom and Lisa had become true partners in building something that honored Eleanor's memory while adapting to contemporary challenges and opportunities. Their integrity and work ethic had earned the respect of employees, guests, and industry professionals alike. "It's the staff that makes the difference," Lisa added, her comment reflecting the employee-focused philosophy that had become central to the Mitchell brand. "When people feel valued and supported, they provide exceptional service naturally." Eleanor understood that long before it became a management buzzword. The employee development programs that Eleanor had initiated and I had expanded were generating measurable results in both job satisfaction and business performance. The Mitchell properties had become known as desirable places to work, with low turnover rates and high employee engagement scores. The investment in training, benefits, and advancement opportunities was paying dividends in customer satisfaction and operational efficiency. Jessica Parker materialized from the crowd, her presence at the anniversary celebration representing one of the most unexpected and meaningful developments of the past 2 years. The interior designer who had once expected to inherit millions had built a thriving business that now provided design services for several Mitchell properties. Her artistic vision and professional competence had earned her a reputation as one of the region's most sought-after hospitality designers. "Sarah," Jessica said, her voice carrying the warmth of genuine friendship that had developed from shared experience and mutual respect, I wanted you to see the portfolio of the Denver project before I present it to the board next week. The Denver project represented the latest expansion of the Mitchell Empire, a historic building that would be transformed into a boutique hotel showcasing local artisans and regional cuisine. Jessica's design concept perfectly captured the balance between historical preservation and modern functionality that had become a signature of the Mitchell brand. Her professional evolution from someone seeking unearned wealth to someone building success through talent and hard work exemplified the transformative power of truth and accountability. The designs are beautiful, I said, reviewing the detailed renderings that demonstrated Jessica's sophisticated understanding of both aesthetic appeal and operational efficiency. You've captured exactly what we want to achieve with this property. Jessica's smile reflected both professional pride and personal satisfaction. The woman who had once planned to renovate someone else's mansion was now creating spaces that reflected her own artistic vision while serving the needs of travelers and the community. Her business had grown to employ 12 designers and support staff, creating opportunities for other creative professionals while establishing her own financial independence. I never thought I'd say this, Jessica said quietly, but Eleanor's final gift to me wasn't the money she left. It was the wake-up call that forced me to build something real. The life I have now is so much more satisfying than anything I could have inherited. The insight was profound and hard-won. Jessica had learned that genuine security came from personal accomplishment rather than association with wealth, and her success was built on the solid foundation of talent, hard work, and integrity. The transformation had been painful but ultimately liberating, creating opportunities for growth that would never have existed within the constraints of dependence and deception. Margaret Mitchell joined our conversation, her presence representing the family stability that had been strengthened by Eleanor's final act of justice and accountability. At 75, she continued to be actively involved in the Foundation's work, particularly the programs that supported women over 50 who were starting new careers or businesses after major life changes. I've been watching the young women from the Foundation, Margaret said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed meaningful change. They remind me of Eleanor when she was building her first hotel. That combination of vision, determination, and absolute refusal to accept limitations. The comparison to Eleanor was both accurate and inspiring. The Foundation's scholarship recipients demonstrated the same qualities that had made Eleanor successful: strategic thinking, willingness to take calculated risks, and commitment to building something lasting rather than seeking quick profits. Their success was validating Eleanor's belief that character and potential were more valuable than connections or inherited advantages. Dr. James Crawford, now 82 but still sharp and engaged, approached our group with the measured pace of someone who had learned to savor life's meaningful moments. His medical practice had evolved into a consulting role, but his friendship with the family had deepened through his involvement with the Foundation's health and wellness programs for women entrepreneurs. Sarah, Dr. Crawford said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed decades of human behavior, Eleanor would be amazed by what you've accomplished. She saw potential in you that even you didn't recognize at the time. The observation was humbling and accurate. The inheritance had provided resources, but the true gift had been the confidence to recognize my own capabilities and the courage to build something that reflected my values rather than others' expectations. The woman who had once defined herself primarily as someone's wife had discovered an identity based on personal accomplishment and positive impact. The evening's program included presentations from Foundation scholarship recipients who had achieved significant milestones in their businesses or careers. Each story represented a different path to success, but all shared common elements: strategic use of the financial support, effective utilization of mentoring relationships, and commitment to giving back to the community that had invested in their potential. Sandra Chen, who had used her foundation grant to launch a sustainable fashion company, spoke about the importance of building businesses that aligned with personal values rather than simply pursuing profit. Her company now employed 37 people and had become a model for ethical manufacturing practices in the garment industry. The foundation didn't just provide money, Sandra explained to the gathered crowd. It provided validation that my vision was worth pursuing and connection to people who could help me navigate the challenges of building something new. Eleanor's legacy lives on in every job we create and every sustainable practice we implement. The ripple effects of Eleanor's strategic philanthropy were visible throughout the evening, in the confidence of the entrepreneurs who had been supported, in the jobs they had created, and in the community impact they were generating. The foundation had become a mechanism for multiplying Eleanor's original investment in character and potential, creating lasting change that would continue for generations. As the evening progressed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The devastating will reading that had exposed David's betrayal had initially felt like the end of everything I had known. Instead, it had been the beginning of a life built on truth, integrity, and genuine accomplishment. The inheritance had provided the resources, but the transformation had required courage, vision, and commitment to building something worthy of Eleanor's trust. The legal practice that had once been my primary source of identity and income had evolved into a specialized consultancy, focused on helping successful individuals create meaningful legacies. The experience of executing Eleanor's will and managing the complex family dynamics it had revealed had given me unique insights into the intersection of wealth, family relationships, and personal values. My client base now included entrepreneurs, business leaders, and philanthropists who wanted to ensure that their success created positive impact beyond their own lifetimes. The work was deeply satisfying, combining legal expertise with strategic thinking about family dynamics, charitable giving, and business succession planning. The mansion that had once felt like a symbol of someone else's success had become truly mine, reflecting my own aesthetic preferences and serving my own purposes. The home office where I conducted client meetings was filled with artwork created by Foundation Scholarship recipients, creating a visual reminder of the positive impact that strategic philanthropy could generate. The gardens that Eleanor had lovingly maintained had been expanded to include a reflection area where Foundation board meetings were held during pleasant weather. The space provided a peaceful setting for strategic planning, while serving as a symbol of growth, cultivation, and the patient work required to create lasting beauty. As midnight approached and the anniversary celebration began to wind down, I stood once again at the marble balustrade, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The transformation that had begun with Eleanor's final act of justice and generosity was complete, but the impact would continue to ripple outward for decades to come. The foundation that bore Eleanor's name had become a permanent institution, endowed with resources that would continue to support women entrepreneurs for generations. The Mitchell Hospitality Group had evolved into a recognized leader in sustainable tourism and employee development, creating models that other companies were beginning to adopt. Patricia Williams joined me at the balustrade, her presence representing the continuity between Eleanor's original vision and its current manifestation. Together, we watched the last guests departing, their conversations animated by the inspiration and connections they had experienced during the evening. Eleanor always said that the best revenge was living well, Patricia observed, her voice carrying the wisdom that comes from witnessing both triumph and tragedy. But what you've built goes beyond revenge. It's redemption, transformation, and the creation of something beautiful from something painful. The insight was profound and accurate. The inheritance had provided the opportunity for revenge, but the choice had been to build something positive and lasting instead. The foundation, the expanded business empire, and the transformed family relationships represented the triumph of construction over destruction, of hope over bitterness. The woman who had once sat in a conference room discovering her husband's betrayal had become someone who understood that true power came from the ability to create positive change in the world. Eleanor's legacy lived on not just in the businesses and properties she had left behind, but in the values she had championed and the example she had set for using wealth as a tool for justice and transformation. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibility, built on the solid foundation of truth, integrity, and genuine accomplishment. Eleanor's final gift had been more than money or property. It had been the opportunity to become the person she had always believed I could be, someone worthy of the trust she had placed in me and capable of carrying her vision forward into the next generation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.